So this segment, we're gonna discuss how Lula, just like AMLO, man, like I don't know, like in communications, but they've been going hard in the paint against the United States recently. AMLO had led a coalition with South American countries to condemn the Cuban embargo, a giant blow to the United States, condemned them for their strategy regarding Ukraine, and also praised BRICS as well. Now you have Lula, who challenged the United States in a way that I didn't expect it to be to this degree. I saw his comments supporting BRICS, his comments where he criticized Zelensky and NATO before the Ukraine war, and that's why I was kind of excited. You guys saw, I was like, man, he's saying good. I was watching, he was saying good stuff foreign policy wise, and I knew that my Brazilian leftists, like Josana and me, the brothers and sisters I met down there, would hold him accountable for domestic policy. So as someone who's not domestically Brazilian, I was looking at his foreign policy. This foreign policy regarding calling out the West is really is exciting. It's good to see, and I know Brazilians will hold him accountable regarding domestic policy. So I'm gonna show you guys this first, and we're gonna warm ourselves into the story because I'm gonna show you guys just one example of Lula rebuking the United States foreign policy the way that I will argue that Bernie Sanders, AOC, and the left should be doing, and that's why it's immensely disappointing. Before the Ukraine war, I was extremely upset with them, but I said it multiple times on the show. Like, the support for them for the Ukraine war is a thing that's a dagger in the heart. They don't even realize, CJ, how much they destroyed their legacy, their credibility, and their reputation. That's why they can't run from that shit. That's why David Shaw knew he got at least say the word Ukraine around AOC. They get faced with protests all the time in their own district. This is going to be a stain on their legacy forever. Meanwhile, in South America, in Mexico, guess who has the balls to call this out? Lula. Guess who is not complicit with funding Nazis in Ukraine? Lula. This is Glenn Greenwald. And this is reported by the New York Times. I always got to pull this because I'm always locked out of the New York Times. Brazil, under Lula, still refuses to provide arms to Ukraine, causing big problems for Kyiv. So you guys, so people who think that, man, Nick guy, he really hates Bernie. He really hates the boutique left on shit. You guys know how much I want to do a story? Well, I'm like, man, you guys see what Bernie Sanders said about NATO? Can you imagine how trippy those segments would be? Like, if Bernie Sanders is saying the same shit as Lula was saying, he was voting no against the Ukraine packages. Yeah. We would obviously have less to criticize him about. I would do stories just like this. I'm like, man, Bernie Sanders calls out Joe Biden for his NATO policy. But guess what? I can't do that. I gotta look at another continent. I gotta look across oceans. We gotta look at Irish politicians to speak truth to power on this. This is why I cover Lula a lot. This is what Glenn Greenwald brings up, his still refusal to support the Ukraine war. Lula's two key points. Our war is to improve citizens' lives, not with Russia. We want to facilitate peace, not fuel war. That's Lula's mentality. So all the NATO leftists who were celebrating Lula winning and pretending that he was one of them, they don't even agree with him on foreign policy. They don't agree with him on something that this important, not like a small disagreement. You guys know Lula more socially conservative. He's kind of a driller too. You know, these are things that left in Brazil had criticism of. Not even like that. You're talking about geopolitics, relationships between countries, your relationship and your stance on China, your stance on the Ukraine war. These are big differences, but these people still pretend that they're some sort of closest representative of Lula politics, right? So this is just a video of what I'm gonna transition to because now the big story is Lula and China. So I just want to show you guys the theme because this is a big deal. The speech that Lula gave, where he pretty much straight up challenges the U.S. dollar hegemony. And this is him meeting. Let's pull the description here. This is I think this is in Shanghai.
Yeah, that's where he's starting. That's where he's starting in Shanghai. Yes.
Yeah, and it said Hawaii. I hope I'm saying that right. Has been doing business in Brazil for 25 years as well. I also want to show this tweet because this tweet is a great summary. I'll show Candace's tweet.
Oh, that was one of the ones I was going to show. So good, good. So
this is a great account. This is a great summary of this article that I put up that I'm kind of locked out of. Like I had this article up because I like to read from the source material usually, but since I'm locked out, let's read this tweet because this tweet is a good substitute for that. So this is Kathan. He said, "Dang, President Lula gives a revolutionary speech in Shanghai, openly challenging the dollar hegemony. At a speech at the BRICS Bank, who new president is former President Mrs. Rousseff, Lula said this: Every night I ask myself why all countries have to base their trade on the dollar. Why can't we do trade based on our own currencies? Now, listen to this. This drew loud applause from the audience of Brazilian and Chinese dignitaries. The writing is on the wall, guys. There's nothing the United States can do at this point. The Biden regime, the Bush, Trump, neoliberal regime is reaping what they sow. And there's nothing that they can really do that's obviously within reason that we know of their character that's going to change this. So anyway, let me continue this tweet. I'll pass to you, CJ, for any thoughts that you have on this as well. Who was it that decided that the dollar was the currency after the disappearance of the gold standard? Why can't a bank like that of BRICS have a currency to finance trade relations between Brazil and China, between Brazil and other countries? These are very significant things that Lula are saying, because if you look at his tweet conclusion, de-dollarization is a geopolitical hurricane that the United States cannot stop. This will be the end of the U.S. dollar preeminent role as the world's reserve currency as well. So giant geopolitical shift, but not worth David Jones' time. Not worth TYT's time to cover this. We got to cover the Culture War instead. This is giant. And if only we had someone like Bernie Sanders that was saying this as well. CJ, do you have another receipt?
Yeah, I have a few receipts here to go through, and you jump in if you have comments on any of these receipts whenever you want to. This one here just kind of sums up. I don't know if this is Telesur. Yeah, this is it. That's what I thought. Telesur. I just guessed too. So let's listen to what they're reporting. This is Brian Meir. I think that's how you say it. Reporting on it. It's only about a minute and 20 seconds.
Brazil's President Lula has finally arrived in the city of Shanghai in China, where he was greeted at the airport by former Brazilian President Dilma Rousseff. Tomorrow, he's going to go to her official inauguration ceremony as the new president of the New Development Bank, or BRICS Bank, as it's commonly called. The Chinese government has expressed satisfaction with Lula's nomination of Rousseff as bank president. The Brazilian delegation is arriving with proposals for 20 bilateral trade agreements, and they hope to move forward jointly on a variety of problems that the country is facing right now. One of the proposals allegedly will be that a Chinese auto company take over all of the Ford factories that were abandoned in 2021 when President Bolsonaro didn't do anything to stop Ford from leaving the country after 100 years. There's a lot of expectation that Brazil is going to join China's Belt and Road Initiative. This would make Brazil the 22nd country in Latin America to do so. One of the main goals of Lula's visit is to jointly work on a peace proposal, bringing as many other countries as they can into a so-called peace club to try and negotiate an agreement between the governments of Ukraine and Russia. Expectations are high for what promises to be a historic moment in the history of both of these countries.
I'm happy to be experiencing, to be alive, to kind of be experiencing.
It's happening faster than I thought.
What's happening? Yeah, and I think it's because the pandemic there's a lot of sort of events that kind of have pushed this forward, and I think the pandemic is one of them. So let's read this. This one is from Fiorella.
I'm glad you got that one
he
too.
went. Yeah, this is before he left, but just
I'm gonna have Fiorella on tomorrow at noon for people who didn't hear the announcement at the beginning. Very interested in talking to her about this topic as well. But go ahead, CJ.
Yeah, so Lula will meet with Xi Jinping to lay out a joint peace plan for the Russia-Ukraine conflict when he visits China on April 11th through 15th, which he's there now. He also said NATO should not be at Russia's border. Russia is the guarantor of a long-standing peace in the world. Ownership of Crimea perhaps must not be discussed at all. He's talking about Crimea. And then new Russian regions worth under standing. And that's just another little tidbit of information I wanted to add. I got a couple of other just headlines to show, just to see how some of the news outlets are covering this. Here's AP. I'm assuming this is AP from Brazil. I'm sorry, no, this is that's just his name in Spanish. Hold on. Okay, so Brazil President Lula, I'll just shorten it, is in the Chinese financial hub of Shanghai as he looks to boost ties with his country's biggest trading partner. Lula is due to meet with his Chinese counterpart Xi Jinping in Beijing on Friday. Lula is right now in Shanghai. Washington Post is also covering it. Now, listen to this, Nick. Listen to how this article, we might want to read a little bit about it. Listen how this article.
I just read it.
Oh, you just read it? Okay, so
no, I mean, I
read it to.
As soon as I saw on the screen, I was like, oh, Jesus Christ. Go ahead, CJ.
Brazilian President Lula da Silva risks alienating the U.S. and Europe as he hosts Iranian warships, equivocates over Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and negotiates with
China. How dare you do? How dare you negotiate with another country without our permission? The audacity of these people, man. Yeah. And by the way, like, it's not the United States being, and not Lula being alienated by the United States and Europe. It's Biden's foreign policy isolating the United States and causing countries who otherwise close friends to go towards China and Russia. I played a clip by Nick and Knight yesterday in my intro, showing how Joe Biden was talking to Russia and China, and they were like, "Oh, I dare you guys to form a relationship. Good luck with that. I dare. You guys not gonna do shit. You guys ain't gonna do shit." Now they're sweating because now people going to China and Russia. So it's not the negative as the Washington Post is trying to portray towards Lula, but that headline is great because that shows that Washington Post and these liberals journals, they are in pure cope and seethe mode, CJ. So they are desperately trying to spin this shit. Oh my God, they're alienating the United States. They're like, all right, bye, bitch. We don't give a fuck. Anyway, go ahead, CJ.
I'm just showing a couple of graphics here. Oh, this is the other one. This is RT. Oh no, sorry. I should have played that as Zelensky, but it's all right. The other. Oh, here it goes. Ben Norton kind of just talks about this part here. Brazil's President Lula da Silva arrives in China today for an historic visit. China's foreign minister points out that this will be Lula's first foreign trip outside of the Americas, reflecting the great importance of Brazil-China ties as co-founding members of BRICS. And that's what this translation, he basically translates that there. So a couple of other receipts to show you and just graphics. That's him in Shanghai. Also, just another picture, and then you see him here walking through. This is in Shanghai with his wife. Love to see it. I'll take that down now. Yep. And then there's a couple more receipts. Oops, I backed up too much. Couple more receipts here to just kind of buy. Or this one here. Let's listen to this lady, and this might be the last one video that I show you. But here is a bit of real politics on the importance of Lula's visit to China from former dictatorship era student union leader, political reporter, and founding director of Brazil's public television station. Now, I will translate it because it's, she's speaking. It's very short, but I will translate it. So I'll play it without the sound, and then I'll just read it here. So let me read this first part. Everyone in Brazil knows that commercial relationships with China were damaged by Bolsonaro's negative negotiation democracy. I've never heard of that word, but I think it means negative diplomacy. And now let's see what's the next part here. Lula wants to rebuild these bridges. The ones that Bolsonaro tore down is what she's referring to. And he wants to take advantage of the political conflict between U.S. and China. Just like like Brazil, benefited in the past from commercial conflict between the U.S. and China. And Brazilian businessmen are excited to see these relationships rebuilt so they can start doing business with China again.
See, that's gonna be interesting. That's gonna be interesting because I want you guys to realize. I'll go ahead and read that part. And I'll finish my thought.
This is why so many businessmen are in China with Lula, which I didn't know that. So she's giving another little tidbit. There's more businessmen. I think that's the last part, Nick. So go ahead.
Now I want to ask them because this is going to be very interesting to see how this shapes Brazilian politics. Because I want you guys to realize that despite Lula's victory and his plan to end poverty in Brazil, Brazil is still a deeply polarized country. It's still a deeply culture war driven country, and it's also heavily driven by the class war. Now, Bolsonaro and the right learned to push the culture war, especially the large anti-LGBT sentiment in Brazil as well against them. But when you look at Bolsonaro's support is largely white, upper class, and affluent. And that's why the media was largely in the tank for Bolsonaro. There was a large class war element, like even among the evangelicals. Like if you look at black poor evangelical Brazilians, they was largely supporting Lula. It was a large class dynamic. So that's why I say it's interesting. So if Lula can bring Chinese business and the business class of Brazil sides with Lula just simply because of his position on China, that's when things get very interesting domestically. Because even though Lula is killing it on the world stage, domestically he still has a lot of hurdles to overcome. He didn't he don't have like all full Congress seats and all that stuff. Like he didn't completely watch Bolsonaro's party. So it would be interesting with that last to see how the Bennett class reacts to Lula now, simply because he is standing for Brazil's strategic autonomy and opening business and trade with China. We see that it'd be interesting to see how that play out. CJ, anything else you have on this?
Yeah,
I have one. Go ahead, CJ. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, it's part of this article, and then we can get to. I mean, it's part of this segment, and then if you have another couple
I have
segments,
one more short story. I have one more short story, like really short story.
But I do want to add this because I was able to get through Washington. So that Washington Post article where they're saying he's not a friend. Listen to what they're saying, Nick. This is the Washington Post saying the West hoped Lula would be a partner. He's got his own plans. Brazilian's new president risks alienating the U.S. and Europe as he hosts Iranian warships, equivocates over the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and negotiates with China.
Look at the headline. This is why I was pushing back at people. Even with remember what we were saying months ago during the Lula election with Bolsonaro? There was people that saying that, oh my God, it's kind of suspicious that Biden is okay with Lula being Bolsonaro. Like, isn't that evidence that he's a Soros plant? And I deeply put back out, like, have you guys seen what he was saying? I don't understand why Biden in the United States thought Lula was out in the open criticizing the United States strategy on Ukraine. That quote that I read all the time was during the election. It was during the election that said his number one priority is to expand BRICS. That's why I was like, holy shit, you guys see what Lula's saying? That's why it didn't make sense when I saw people saying that he's some sort of Soros puppet, because there is legitimate criticism on like where he stands on like mandates and all this stuff, and that's why the West didn't like Bolsonaro, because Bolsonaro was more like on the right DeSantis position on mandates.
Oh, yeah.
So my take was the establishment turned on Bolsonaro because of COVID, and they thought because Lula was more on their side on COVID that they can rein him in on other issues. That was not the case. And that's why I thought was going to be interesting paying attention to. And that what this article was playing to. Like, man, the West thought they're going to have Lula be the good boy. Nah, bro, nah. It just politics is different in Brazil. No matter what our position is, Lula constituency was largely in support of Lula's COVID policy. That's just how Brazil domestic policy works. You're still going to have criticism of that, but that helped Lula ride a wave of victory. But go ahead, CJ.
All right, so let's read a little bit of this, and then I'll pass to you for your next story. In his first months in office, Brazilian President Lula da Silva has declined to join President Biden in condemning the Russian invasion of Ukraine, allowed Iranian warships to dock in Rio de Janeiro, and dispatched a senior advisor to meet with Venezuelan strongman Nicolas Maduro. So they're big mad, Nick. These are some of the things they list of why he's not showing that
that's
he's
another thing I
down with
forgot.
the imperialists. Go ahead.
Sorry, CJ, that's another thing I forgot.
Go ahead.
Another thing I thought was very that had me excited about Lula was he said he wanted to normalize relationship with Venezuela, and that's a big shift over Bolsonaro. Bolsonaro was a Western bootlicker. Not only was he a Zionist bootlicker, but he was caught sending military death squads into Venezuela. He was big into overthrowing Nicolas Maduro. That's why whenever people say Maduro was like the anti-establishment candidate, like, what are you talking about? It makes no sense. You have no idea what you're talking about. He was a puppet of the U.S. regime. Yes, he pushed back on a few things, but on large things like Zionism and Israel. Meanwhile, Lula stands for Palestinian rights. Like, these are big geopolitical differences. And I always want to emphasize this with, I hope my communist and socialist Brazilian brothers or sisters are successful pushing Lula domestically, because they have a lot of criticisms of Lula domestically. But on terms of foreign policy and geopolitical world stage, Lula has surpassed what I thought he was going to do. That's just me saying that. But go ahead, CJ.
Yeah, and I agree. And former member Josana also was like, yeah, she was down for Lula, and she's on the ground, had activists, like some of the bigger, well-known activists.
Claudia, I talked to a ton
came
of
and they were all saying, yeah, we're going with Lula, but we're gonna be right at his face, and I believe them. They're not like,
Yeah, they about that life, guys.
I believe them. Yeah, they about that show.
There was a guy I interviewed on the show a long time ago. This dude was literally kidnapped and literally trying to be charged by Bolsonaro squad. Like, it's not like ordinary U.S. weak boutique left politics. It's like life and death struggle shit. I was talking to indigenous Brazilians, and they was making an argument that it was genocide. These are the old FHL days when we had Josana on. This is why I learned a lot about this domestic policy. And I am rooting for them because Josana said on our show, we're going to hold Lula accountable because we got a lot of criticism on some of this domestic shit he's talking about. But he's way better than Bolsonaro because of the reasons I listed. His support of the destruction of the Amazon rainforest. He was leading police death squads that you had indigenous people that made the claim that he was committing genocide. And who are you going to believe?
What I was just about to say,
I'm not there. I'm not there, but trust me, I'm gonna believe the indigenous people over the Bolsonaro government.
Yeah, so just like we believe the Palestinians over Israel, just like I'm gonna believe black people and indigenous people over the police state here. That's how it's just gonna be. Sorry, sorry. That's how I work. Yeah. So yeah. Let me read some of this. Is pretty ridiculous. I mean, it's the Washington Post, and they're basically protecting or at least projecting, because of hegemony, the loss of U.S. hegemony. So on Friday, Lula heads to Beijing, the finale of a 3-day trip to China. More than 200 Brazilian business leaders. So this is what that video was referencing. That's why all the business leaders, you know how many capitalists are fucking seething at this.
Yeah.
200 Brazilian business leaders headed to China ahead of Lula's visit to hash out a flurry of deals that will bring Brazil closer to its larger trading partner at a time when the relationships between Washington and Beijing have grown increasingly tense. Lula's schedule includes a stop in Shanghai's facility of Huawei. I always say that wrong. Huawei, the telecommunications giant that has been subject to U.S. sanctions. In the Chinese capital, Lula will meet with Xi Jinping, the country's top leader, who is pushing to upend the U.S.-led international order, Nick, and position China as a diplomatic power broker. Brasilia, I think, meanwhile, is helping Beijing boost its currency, the yuan, over the dollar. Let me go ahead.
I bet the Washington Post, because I don't read the Washington Post because they always pay lock, right? I bet they are just as hilarious to read as Morning Joe is to watch. Yes, because this article is full of cope and seed, and I'm greatly enjoying this. But go ahead, CJ. That's all I want.
Now, I do want to read this part. This is what I was trying to say. I wanted to read this again because It's like you said, like it feels good just to say this shit. Let me just say this again. in the Chinese capital, Lula will meet with Xi Jinping, the country's top leader, who is pushing to upend the U.S.-led international order.
Yeah.
And
so
position China as a diplomatic power broker.
Dude, I'm like reading this
Brazil,
in
in
Joe
the
Scarborough's
meanwhile,
voice. I'm like
I
reading his
swear.
voice. Go ahead, CJ. My bad.
I wonder how they're covering. I haven't watched Morning Joe in a couple of days, so I wonder how they're covering this. But Brazil is helping Beijing boost its currency, the yuan, over the dollar. Lula's election victory last year over Bolsonaro, the dictatorship, admiring former military officer who aligned himself with President Donald Trump and the global right.
That's also what did it too, by the way, because like the United States and Bolsonaro had a close relationship. His stance on COVID and his open friendship with Donald Trump. That's why you see them being critical of Bolsonaro. They don't have any substantive criticism of his policy. That's what it is. Sorry, CJ, go ahead.
It's as long as they can tie him to Trump and act like he's just a Trump ally and like he wouldn't be just as an ally to Joe Biden.
To be fair, guys, Bolsonaro is extremely Trumpy. That's not even an untrue statement. Like there's a lot of parallels between him and Trump.
That's what they call him.
That's why they hate him.
Trump. The Brazilian
but that's
Trump,
why they hate him, though. But go ahead, CJ. Go ahead.
Yeah. So, align himself, Trump and global right, buoyed optimism that Latin America's most populous nation would be a partner in promoting democratic norms in the Western Hemisphere and beyond. So this is what this is what the United States was hoping. But instead, Nick, Lula is reminding the world of his approach to foreign policy, which, in keeping with his first stint in office, prioritizes pragmatism and dialogue and shows little concern over whether it antagonizes Washington or the West. Like, they're doing what the fuck they want for their country, regardless of what it does to the United States. And the United States is like, what the fuck is going on here? They're not used to that. A bully's not used to being treated normal.
The ideology and the way the Western chauvinist views the world is fascinating to me, man. Like I told you, I was a college dropout. Like, I wasn't that passionate into that shit. Like, dude, if I went back and I studied this shit, I would have been hella into it. Because to me, it's fascinating, dude. Because you see how the West, they don't even know they view the world completely different than me. My mind ecology. Look, their opinion on a leader is just based on how subservient they are to the West. How dare you negotiate and be friendly with China? How dare China expand their country's geopolitical power in Africa? So anything that does not go through the West, they view with disdain. And that is a worldview that is so foreign to me. I might as well be studying an alien. Like, these people are crazy to me. But go ahead, CJ.
One example, this is an example they give, Nick. The Russian invasion. Brazil supported a UN resolution in February calling for peace and demanding Moscow withdraw troops from Ukraine. Now, see, this is what the U.S. uses. Now, this is why some people were mad about Lula deciding to say, hey, y'all will sign a resolution, but we covered it here. And, you said, and sort of our saying, it's like, it's not willing to do it, but he's doing it. But at the same time, he's saying this other thing against Ukraine. But this is what they're using it. Now they have him sign this thing, which is just really doing it in conjunction with something else. Now they're using it. Look, he signed it, and now he's switching up. They're trying to make it seem like he's switching up. So let's continue with the article. But weeks later, Lula refused to sign on to a declaration from President Biden's Summit for Democracy that condemned Russia's assault on its neighbor. A senior advisor to Lula did not believe the forum was the appropriate place to discuss war. In contrast with Bolsonaro's pugnacious isolationism, Lula has long sought to expand Brazil's role on the world stage. He argues that Brazil, home to more people than the UN Security Council's permanent members, Russia, Britain, and France, should be granted membership in that elite club. And here's the quote: Brazil wants to reform world governance. I don't know who this is, but a senior advisor to the president told the Washington Post, quote, We would like to have a world governance which does not look. I'm sorry. We would like to have a world governance which does not look like the present Security Council. And I'll stop there. The article goes on, but this is the reaction, Nick, to Lula. This is the freak out that you described. Yeah, this is the freak out that you described. This is the freak out that, like, they're acting like this is okay, but they're really freaking out.